I am Marc Silber, and I'm happy to join you from Carmel, California, where I'm an author, educator, and writer. Today, we're going to connect with our good friend, again, Dan Milnor. We're going to talk about his specific images and his compositional tools. Dan, welcome to Advancing Your Photography. Let's dive in. Here we go. So tell us what we're looking at here.
Oh, yeah. So I shot my first political convention in 1992 in Houston. I was still a student at UT Austin in the photojournalism program. And I went to Houston in 92. It was the first time I worked for Associated Press. I got a big wire service credentials. The first time I got images on the wire, that kind of thing was exciting. So the political convention to me was just a gold mine photographically. So I shot the conventions in 92, 96, and also 2000. And this was downtown Los Angeles in 2000. And the LAPD just turned it into an absolute war zone. The American public had basically had no idea what these guys were doing to the population in downtown LA. And as a photographer, I got clubbed and punched and gassed and
Ouch.
almost shot in the head with a rubber bullet. I dropped a roll of film and bent down to pick it up, and they shot rubber bullets into the crowd, went over my head, hit the guy behind me, hit him in the side of the head, dropped. He eventually won a big lawsuit, I think, against the LAPD years later. It was crazy. As a photographer, loved it, loved every minute of it. That's part of, the process of being a photojournalist. You're going to get clubbed and gassed and punched and all that stuff. But there were really amazing photographs. And at the time, I was, again, a 2 lens film guy. And, you're just operating on the street. You're constantly moving. There's pictures all around. And this was, a tricky little moment, because if you got within arm's reach of these guys, they would just start swinging with their riot batons. But I knew I had to get close. It's a 35 millimeter. The real impact of this image is the background. So the foreground, the cop to the right is the foreground. The cops to the left and center are the midground. And then you've got the security guard on the right and the back. But the real picture is this workforce trapped behind metal meshing because there's riots in the street. And, this is a one frame moment, because you get in too close, you stay too long, you're going to get the club. And it was awesome. It was a lot of fun. And I think people kind of they're surprised when, you talk about getting trashed when you're a photographer, but it's just part of the process, and it's worth it when you get frames like this. I love this picture, but it's also the quintessential use of a 35 millimeter, any lens, whether 24, 28, 35, you want to layer it up. You want foreground, midground, background. And I think this picture kind of exemplifies the kind of work that I'm after when I'm using those lenses.
It really is a perfect example of what you were saying before about getting up close and getting those layers in the image, right? So this is a great example of that.
Yeah, it's funny because when I first got there, I literally had just driven downtown. I got off my motorcycle and I sort of went into downtown. And downtown was a ghost town. They had cleared everybody out off the streets. I've never seen it like that before or since. And I looked over and there was a full squad of LAPD guys in riot gear with like these silver projectile guns that shoot tear gas. And they were sort of jogging in formation. And I just got behind them and started jogging behind them because I was inevitably there's going to be an image here. And, the guy in line. And the thing is, police are put in really difficult positions all the time. So, yeah, they did things to me that very uncool, but at the same time, you realize that they're under pressure and stress as well. So, one of the guys in line turned around and saw me jogging behind him, and he made some joke. He made some comment about there's this ugly guy following us or something. I don't remember exactly what he said, but it was really funny. And I thought, oh, this is going to go really well. And then, of course, it just unravels at light speed. But it was interesting.
Let's have a look at this next one. Where are we?
In fact, this was shot in Cusco, Peru. I'm actually heading back there to teach a workshop in a few months. I'm heading back in September. This was Cusco during Easter week, but these four monks, this wasn't really in tandem with the sort of Easter festivities that were going on. I just happened to be in the plaza in Cusco, and it was pouring rain, and these four guys came out with their umbrellas, and they were heading from sort of the southwestern corner of the square into one of the main churches. And I was just like, this is a dream come true. Again, 35 millimeter film on a Leica body. And, having the church in the background, I just flipped it vertical. I think I shot 2 frames horizontal and this 1 frame vertical, but the vertical just, to me, you have cylindrical human beings, which are basically cylindrical in shape.
Yeah.
And the church background, it really, the horizontals were there was too much extraneous information in there. And I got lucky because you have the light reflecting off the pavement after the rain. They're
That's
wearing
brilliant.
white. They've got umbrellas. You've got light hitting off. It's overcast and rainy day, but you've got enough direction to the light to separate those umbrellas from the black background. And that's really key. If there hadn't been rain on the umbrellas, there would be no reflectance, and those would have probably blended into the background a little bit too much. And I also like the movement, the body position of the second priest, and the second person, the one right in the middle. He's got a nice little movement to his leg.
Yeah.
It's a good memory. It's a simple photograph. This is just a photograph about being there and getting it in focus.
And it is about timing, as you said, because that second guy has got his foot up, right? And the third guy has got his foot just kind of coming down. So you definitely get that motion feeling.
Yeah, to me, it's such a quintessentially Latin American photograph. I really love the region. I try to go to Latin America at least once a year. I absolutely love it. I love the history. I love the people. I love everything about it, the landscape, the light. And so Peru is just a magical, magical place. You could shoot in Cusco for the rest of your life and never, get tired of it. And,
that's awesome.
Just a fortunate moment.
A lot of contrast also in this image, not just in terms of the white robes, but also the contrast of the textures, like the texture of the pavement versus, what's going on with the church itself, and obviously the white against the black and that sort of thing.
Yeah, from day one shooting black and white film, going back to the 1980s. I was a dark, grainy, contrasty photographer. I wasn't concerned about the zone system and tonal range. I just liked really high contrast, high grain, black and white images, and I'm still the same way today. That's what I prefer.
Me too. What do you think this film was?
It could only be one of 2 films. It was either Tri-X or TMZ, and I have a sinking suspicion this was Tri-X.
Yeah, I think so.
I shot primarily TMZ for almost 15 years. That was my number 1 film, but this looks like Tri-X.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Amazing. Good old Tri-X.
Oh, yeah.
All right. What are we looking at here?
An image from New Mexico. It's a project called Una Pura Verdad, A Simple Truth. And it's about the story of wildness in the American West and how that concept of wildness transcends through all aspects of life, from architecture to law enforcement to migration to just everyday. The frontier was officially tamed in the mid 1800s, but there's still a pervasive undercurrent of wildness in the American West. And I live in New Mexico, which was considered the last of the wild states. And so there is, when New Mexico, the events that happen in New Mexico on a daily basis, which really don't go reported in the rest of the country, it's remarkable what happens out there. And, there's still, I run into Americans every year who don't know New Mexico is part of the United States, believe it or not.
Seriously?
Yeah, it happens more than you can possibly imagine.
Amazing.
This was shot down at a place called Elephant Butte, which is a big reservoir. It's the biggest reservoir in the southern half of the state. And it's surrounded by kind of like a sand dune area. And it's in quite peril right now because of the drought, the long-term drought. They're thinking that may entirely dry up. But it's a place where families go on the weekend to camp and hang out. And these guys were playing football, and like I used to play with my brother and all his friends and my friends. And you just had this unbelievable Western epic sunset. And again, I'm just off to the east side shooting west, working with these guys as silhouettes, looking for that guys closer in the foreground, in the midground, in the background, the ball in the air, those shafts of light coming from the clouds, and just looking for timing, playing for timing. They were aware that I was there. We had a short conversation. They not only didn't care that I was there, they sort of loved the fact that I was there. And again, pre-digital, it wasn't pre-digital. I just happened to be shooting film, and I don't do social media. So they knew I wasn't going to be posting this. It was just really about making a record for this project, which is still ongoing. I've been working on this for several years. And as you can see, this is a magazine that I printed of the work.
I love it. I love silhouettes and, just the silhouette against that incredible sky, especially because you've got those rays coming out and all that grain is just giving it that gritty feeling, which is really cool.
Yeah, I mean, when you're in a target-rich environment, if you've done photography long enough, you go into a scene like this and you're like, don't screw it up, don't
Yeah,
screw it up,
really.
because it's there. And you just work that scene as much as possible. I probably shot 15 frames maybe of this scene, and I knew I had it in there, so there was no reason to shoot more. But for me, that's a lot of exposures to get a moment. But it was changing. There were more and more guys coming into play, and it was sort of ebbing and flowing as a game, and the splinters of light were changing as well. So I wanted to make sure I covered my bases.
Awesome. Okay. This is a newer one, right?
Yeah, so this is a whole different body of work. I started this work in 2019. This is from the country of Albania. I've been teaching workshops there with Elena Dorfman. We co-teach. And I first went in 2019, went back in 2022, and I just came back from the trip in 2023. And this is unlike any work I've done before. This is all multiple exposure work, which I started again in 2019, repeated in 2022, and then I kept with it this year. And it's a very, very different way for me to work. I'm also shooting in color as well as black and white. And multiple exposures are interesting because these are all done in camera. I have no interest in doing this in post-production. In fact, I would never do it in post-production. The juice for me is to be able to do this in the field. And that requires, it's trickier than it looks. It requires, you have to look for not only composition, but also density. And you have to sort of predetermine what layer of the image is going to be most dominant. And by the way, when you're shooting this, you can't shoot a couple and then go do something else and come back. You have to commit to it in real time. So once you shoot your first exposure, you have to figure out how many of these you're going to do before, and you have to just do them sequentially right then. And the camera, in 2019, my camera would only shoot two exposures. And then in 2022, I went back with an X-T4. And I think that would shoot like 5 or 6 exposures. And this year I went back with the XH2, and that does 9 exposures on a single 9 frames in a single exposure.
Wow!
But most of them average 3 to 4.
Right.
Anything after that is a little tricky.
That's getting to be a lot.
This was very representative of Albania with the statue, the old car, and then some of the communist architecture that still survives from the dictatorship era, and the license plate, obviously Albania.
I love it. That's very cool. All right. And what are we looking at here, Dan?
Yeah, this is another double. This is just an example of some of the color. This is a 4 exposure, multiple exposure. And again, you have to sort of envision this in your mind before you start to build the images backwards. It's a pretty fun thing. It's a very low percentage of working. To give you an example, I shot a total of 1,947 exposures over 2 weeks, but I would divide that by 4, which is 486 images. And then I made a quick edit, which was down to 151. And then I did a real edit, which took it down to 30. And then I did my final edit, which took it down to 12 images total over 2 weeks. And so I had about 6 color and 6 black and white images. And again, this is up in a town called Theth in the Albanian Alps. And Albania has more water than any country in the world outside of Norway. And so the water, it's not, it's a fact that sort of surprises everybody that hears about that, but they have this unbelievable water resources there. And so I needed something that was representative. This is a town called Theth in the Albanian Alps, also known as the Accursed Mountains. And they border the northern region of the country. And they have just these incredible rivers and springs that are turquoise. I just saw somewhere that Albania was voted the #1 travel destination in the world, which is both
really
good and very sad, because Albania is changing so fast, because it's basically the only unknown gem left in Europe, and it's easy to get to. It's safe. The Albanian people are incredible. It's still affordable, and so last year you hardly saw any tourists. There was hardly any English on the street. 2019, I didn't see any tourists. There was no English on the street. And this year there were tour buses and it's changing fast. And
Yeah.
on one hand, it's good because these people endured 50 years of isolation and dictatorship and a lot of hardship. And so, they're sort of embracing this greater outside democratic world, but you also have leadership that can, make decisions that are not necessarily the best in the long term for the country. But it's a gorgeous place. I just have nothing but love for this country.
Well, Dan, hey, listen, I want to thank you again for sharing your images, the stories, your hard-won experience. And on that note, is there anything you'd like to leave our audience with in terms of composition or anything else that you have touched upon today?
Yeah, I think once you get to a certain level of photography, when you've done this quite a while, you find that there's a sweet spot for the kind of work that you can make. And it's good to make those images. You go out in the field and you're basically sort of, those are the core images that you make, and it makes you feel good about yourself. You're like, I'm making progress. But you always, always, always have to be leaning forward and pushing the boundaries of what you can do. You should be constantly experimenting with things that are just outside your grasp. You may be doing things that you can't fully explain why you're doing it. You're tinkering and trying and experimenting, because those are the images that are going to lead you to where you're going to be in 2 years or 5 years down the road. If you're shooting the same images you've shot again and again and again, and it's like just add water, change location, add water, you shoot the same pictures over and over again, at some point that wears out its usefulness. And as creatives, we have to constantly progress. We have to take chances. If you're not failing and taking chances on a regular basis, you're not trying hard enough.
Boom. I love that. Thanks again, Dan. And
Sure.
Happy travels. We'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you again for joining us on Advancing Your Photography, and be sure to put those points to use. One thing I want to invite you to do is get my free download of my composition field guide. You can take this and put it in your phone and carry it around with you as you're photographing as reminders. It's got 15 different compositional tools that you should put to use. You can find that right up here and in the description. So grab that and put it to use. And please subscribe and enable the bell so you don't miss any of our new episodes. And I love to have you leave your comments. You can also comment for Dan. And please share this video. But remember to get out and capture your own images of life.